Hey everybody, this is Crested Geckos. Today I'll be doing a Crested Gecko care video. So let's start with some basic information and a couple of fun facts about Crested Geckos. So Crested Geckos come from the islands of New Caledonia, which are off the coast, the eastern coast of Australia. It's kind of a temperate rainforest sort of thing there. It's got a lot of pine trees and just a pretty temperate place, not too humid, not too tropical, but there's a lot of different species that come from that area, like Leachianus, Chahua, Gargle Gecko, and what we have here, a Crested Gecko, all come from New Caledonia. Crested Geckos were thought to be extinct up until 1994 when a pretty significant population was found in New Caledonia, so that's pretty cool. They went from being thought that they were extinct to being a very, very popular pet in the pet trade. Crested geckos make wonderful beginner pets because they're, as you can tell, they're super calm. Frida is probably my calmest gecko I have, and they're very, very soft to the touch. They don't eat insects. If you don't want to give them insects, I should say, you don't have to give them insects. You can feed them just Crested Gecko diet. So if you're not a big fan of watching animals eat other animals, you can just give them Crested Gecko fruit diet. They make really wonderful pets. They don't take up a lot of space. They don't require too much care. They're just really wonderful animals. So I'm going to teach you guys how to care for them. When housing Crested Geckos, keep in mind that Crested Geckos are an arboreal species, meaning that they live above ground. When found in the wild, they are found above the ground, pretty low to the ground, so kind of in the lower layer of the forest, but still above ground, so they're considered an arboreal species. So when you purchase them a terrarium, keep in mind that you want to buy a terrarium that's generally taller than it is wide. So I would recommend nothing smaller than a 12 by 12 by 18 terrarium, which is a common terrarium sold by ZooMed and Exoterra. I wouldn't recommend anything smaller than that for an adult, one adult Crested Gecko. What I have here is a 12 by 12 by 20, so this is a perfect size for them. You could go bigger. I used to have Frito in a 20-gallon tall terrarium, which was quite a bit of space, and she stopped eating for a while, and I was wanting to put her in a front opening terrarium because they're easier to manage, so I took her out of that and put her in this one. She's been doing just fine. So always buy a terrarium that's taller than it is long. It's very important because they do like to climb and they like to spend their time above ground. You'll very rarely see them on the ground. You'll probably only see them on the ground when they're, like, if you breed them and they lay eggs, or if they're stressed out, sometimes they'll start burrowing on the ground. You know there might be an issue with your gecko. Okay, so let's talk about the composition of the terrarium. So I chose the living vivarium look, meaning that I provided some living plants in my Crested Gecko's cage. I've got some ivy in the background, as you can see. I've got some moss growing up there. Got a Sansevieria. These are really great plants for many different geckos, especially bigger lizards like the Crested Gecko. They're very sturdy and they won't weigh them down too much. So my Crested Gecko spends a lot of her time chilling out on these Sansevieria leaves. I also included the pothos, which is a super hardy and easy plant to grow. As you can see, they collect a lot of water on them after I spray the terrarium. And that's how Crested Geckos get their hydration. You really don't have to give them a water dish because they'll just walk around, climb around, and lick the liquid and droplets off of leaves. So I like to provide a pothos for that purpose. I've got a couple of hides in here. She really doesn't use them too much. She generally just gets in the leaves, but I've got a cork flat. Cork flats are really, really great hides for many lizards, especially Crested Geckos. Here's a whole tub of them. A cork too would be an ideal hiding spot for a Crested Gecko. I've got several different cork flats in here. And I've also got a bamboo hollow. She doesn't use this too much. When you have a Crested Gecko, try to keep, like if you have bamboo hollows or cork hollows, try to keep it tilted because they're very rarely going to want to chill out in a space that's exactly vertical, which this one for some reason it always springs back after I push it into the clay. So she doesn't use that too often, but she seems to be just fine chilling in the Sansevieria leaves. So for substrate, you want to keep a pretty high humidity substrate because you need to keep these guys around 60 to 75% humidity. I've got several different types of mosses and eco earth, I believe, and some wood chips, okay? And I've also got a drainage layer because I have a living vivarium. I don't want my terrarium to flood because that would be bad news. So here's a good example of a pretty good substrate for a Crested Gecko. As you can see, I've got some eco earth and bark chips in here. That's a really great humidity substrate. It'll be nice and good for Crested Gecko. You can also use things just like sphagnum moss or paper towel if you're going for a simplistic setup and you want to keep them in like a tub. You're trying to go on a cost-effective setup, you can go with paper towel. Another good substrate just to cover the ground level with is magnolia leaves. It's a great way to add a really naturalistic look, hold some humidity, hold some water droplets, and provide some ground cover. So that pretty much sums up Crested Gecko housing. Feeding Crested Geckos is super simple. All you have to do is provide them Rapashi or Pangea Crested Gecko diet. So what Crested Gecko diet is basically a powdered fruit diet with all the nutrients and vitamins and everything your Crested Gecko could need in a powdered form. All you do is add a little bit of water to it, mix it up. I like to mix it into kind of a thicker yogurt texture, and that's the way my geckos like it. I'm assuming that other people who have experience with geckos, their geckos might like it a different texture, but mine kind of like it so it runs around a little bit, but it's pretty firm. And I leave it in there for 2 days. It'll start to stink after a while, so I recommend, I'd change the food every other day. I provide them new food. Sometimes they won't eat it. Don't get too worried about it, especially as babies. They're pretty finicky eaters. If they don't eat very much as hatchlings, they don't eat much at all. I remember being really stressed about my gecko not eating very much. But the best way to check if they're eating is if they're pooping. If they're having regular bowel movements and their feces look normal, that means they're eating, even though you might not be able to tell that they've eaten much out of their capsule, out of their portion. So a good way to give the food to Crested Geckos is to buy one of these magnetic ledges. These are great for many arboreal species of reptile that eat Pangea or Crested Gecko diet. So you simply just suction cup it to the side of your tank and place your Crested Gecko diet in here, and they'll climb up there and eat above ground, which is eating above ground is much safer. There's much less chance of impaction if they're eating above the ground. I'll show you another example of one of these magnetic ledges. I've got one right here for my lychee. Obviously it's bigger because he's a really big animal, so it's magnetically attached. He makes a huge mess, but you can see I provide him a little bit more food. Ooh, he's made a mess. He didn't eat much last night. That's great. So the flavors that my geckos really enjoy are the mango apricot flavor, which I have right here. It really does smell good, and I've tasted it before, and it's not awful. And I've never tasted the insect flavor, but they seem to like it. I like to mix it up each week. I like to do 1 week apricot and mango, or whatever flavors it is, and then 1 week insect. This has an added insect flavor and insect protein, so this is going to provide a little bit more protein to your reptile, to your Crested Gecko. You can also supplement your Crested Gecko's diet with crickets. I've never really... My Crested Gecko, as a hatchling, enjoyed them more than she does now. I do try to offer her crickets once a week, but she never really goes at it. Crested Geckos are pretty clumsy animals, and they're not great hunters, so giving them Crested Gecko diet for the entirety of their life will be sufficient in keeping them healthy. But if your Crested Gecko does enjoy crickets, I highly recommend providing them to them and dusting them with calcium each time you feed it to them, okay? So, simple enough, Crested Gecko diet, and if they like the occasional insect, you can provide them that. Make sure to add some calcium powder to your Crested Gecko's food every now and then to give them all the minerals and vitamins that they need. So that's very important to prevent metabolic bone disease and many other health disorders. Calcium dusting and adding calcium to the Crested Gecko diet is very important. Heating and providing humidity to your Crested Gecko is pretty simple, honestly. Crested Geckos can be housed in room temperature, as long as your house temperature never gets below 65. Crested geckos can manage occasional dip, like especially in the winter if you live in like the northern-ish regions of the U.S. where you experience 4 seasons like I do here in Kentucky. I experience 4 seasons. It does get colder in the home during the winter. My Crested gecko, what they'll do is they'll eat a little bit less, and if it really gets cold in your house, I recommend adding some type of heat lamp and putting it on a pretty low setting, or providing a heat pad, which is my favorite way to provide heat to my reptiles. Providing like a ZoomEd heat pad, that'll bring the temperature up a little bit. But honestly, never had the issue where I've had to provide too much heating to my Crested gecko. A good temperature range for a Crested gecko is around 65 to 78 degrees. Getting up in the 80s can cause your gecko to get pretty stressed, because where they come from in New Caledonia, it stays pretty mild and beautiful weather all year long. So getting too cold is an issue and getting too hot is an issue, but room temperature generally works pretty well. Humidity, I spray my Crested gecko about twice a day, once at night and once in the morning and sometimes at night, depending on how the terrarium looks and what the humidity levels are. What you want to do is get the humidity up to around 75 to 80% right after a spray, but do not maintain that humidity for the rest of the day. What you're trying to do is have spikes of humidity that simulate nature, where in the morning humidity is pretty high, the dew's all over the ground and everything like that. Get the humidity up to around 75 to 80%, and then throughout the day it can dry out in the terrarium, and then at night you can spike it back to 75 to 80%. It's very important that the terrarium has good ventilation, so some of the humidity can vent out throughout the day. You don't want to keep the terrarium. Wow. You don't want to keep the terrarium at a constant high humidity. That's not good for your Crested gecko. I believe that can cause probably respiratory issues. You don't want to keep the terrarium at that high humidity. I'm going to add a couple of screenshots to this video showing annual daytime temperatures in New Caledonia and annual nighttime temperatures, so you can get a pretty good grasp and more exact grasp on the temperatures in New Caledonia. I also want to mention lighting for Crested geckos. Crested geckos as a species are nocturnal, meaning they do pretty much perform all their physical activity at night, meaning they eat, move around, jump around, all at nighttime. So providing light is really not that necessary, but I like to provide light to give my Crested gecko a day and night cycle. I believe it helps their colors and it gives them a track of when it's daytime, when it's nighttime, and pretty much to keep the plants alive. Without this light, the plants would really struggle and not thrive. So lighting is optional for Crested geckos. Don't really provide heat lamps. You can put a little UVB lamp in there. I've heard that really helps with coloration, but I don't add that. I don't really think it's necessary. Alright guys, that basically finishes up Crested gecko care. You could probably tell from the video, these are very easy to care for animals, and I really love them. Really beautiful creatures. They come in all different kinds of colors. Whatever your preference is, you can probably find a Crested gecko that looks the way you want it. Really beautiful animals, great first-time pets for first-time reptile owners. I really recommend picking one of these guys up. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If there's anything I missed out on, please tell me in the comments below. And if you have any questions, you can go ahead and post those in the comments below as well. Make sure to hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, and turn on post notifications. And if you feel like you want to comment, go ahead. So thanks for watching, guys. This is Crested Geckos. I will see y'all in the next one.